Hello again and welcome to another Imperial Guard Tactics video. And today, guys, I am extremely excited to announce a new series. I will be doing an in-depth and updated look at the Militarum Tempestus Scions. For those longbeards out there, I'm talking about the Stormtroopers. The best of the best of the best, as long as you're not genetically enhanced. These guys are one of the best bits about the Imperial Guard. They're absolutely fantastic. They've got such a rich background, and what we're going to be doing with this series of videos is going through all the tactical aspects of the Stormtroopers. Now, some of you might be going, but Morning Glory, haven't you covered Stormtroopers before? And I will answer to you, yes, young conscript, I have, but it was a while ago. It was the beginning of 8th, a lot of it was theory-based, and to be honest, things have changed so drastically with the release of Psychic Awakening, The Greater Good, that I think it's about time that we revisit the Scions and do another in-depth, complete shakedown of the sub-faction. So today, guys, so what it's going to cover, just so that you know what's going to be in the series, we're going to be looking at the individual regiments. We're going to be looking at how each regiment will affect your play style, which regiments are best as a standalone force, which regiments are best as a supporting force. We're going to be looking at Scions as a standalone army, which they now have the ability to do that with all the options they've been given. We're also going to look how to use them as a support faction for your Imperial Guard, how you can slot in a little sound attachment as in an Imperial soup list. And we're also, speaking of soup, going to be, in this series, looking at Scion soup. What is the best concoction and mix of Scion regiments that you can take to get the most out of them? Because you don't have to limit yourself to a single regiment. You can mix and match, so that's what we will be doing. We also go through general Scion tactics, individual regiment breakdown, unit analysis based on each regiment. It's just going to be completely all-encompassing. So, without further ado, let's take a look at the Scions, their background, and how they've changed over the years, and some general tactics and tips to keep in mind if you are considering getting into the Emperor's Finest, the true Emperor's Finest. So, over the years, just a quick context update, on Scions, because they weren't always called Scions, you see, and they've changed a lot over the years. So when they were first introduced by Games Workshop properly back in 2nd edition, they were essentially seen as just elite line infantry. They could take heavy weapons in squads, for example. So if you go on eBay, you can search for Beret Stormtroopers, and you will find autocannon teams and stuff. They were armed with what were called Hell guns, which were essentially slightly better lasguns. They're not as good as what we get today. And the whole thing about Stormtroopers was they were basically just upgunned guardsmen. That was it. They didn't have too much else going for them. And then, in 3rd edition, they got a new model. They got the ones that are my favourite line of models, which was what I like to call the Space Stormtroopers, the vac suits. They got a really cool sci-fi aesthetic. Look, they went from just being, generic military soldier with berets to proper sci-fi. What the hell does half the equipment on this model even do? I don't care. It looks cool. So they went from that, and their role changed significantly at that point. They went from being an alternative line infantry unit to very much a heavy infantry, shock infantry kind of thing for the Imperial Guard. They were no longer able to take heavy weapons in their squads. They had a much greater focus on being elite units. And this was really where you started seeing the beginnings of things like little 5-man squads that would drop in, complete an objective, and leave. And most Imperial Guard armies would have a squad of Stormtroopers. But again, they were not a standalone faction. Remember, at this point, they were still called Stormtroopers. They were not a standalone faction. And like I said, in fact, most armies could only take... would only include one squad of these guys because they were relatively expensive. They still got their benefits of having heavier armor and having better las guns, but again they were not armed with hot shots. They were armed with hell guns, and their job really was to just be a sort of an elite reserve for an Imperial Guard commander. Most, like I said, most people would include one 10-man squad of these guys. They had some unique war gear like targeters, which back in the dark days of old editions, you couldn't pre-measure anything, guys. So which meant that you would select your unit, select what you wanted to shoot at, and then measure to see if they were in range. And if they weren't in range, they just didn't get to shoot. That was terrible. So most people would aim at things that they guaranteed they were in range of. But Stormtroopers, they had targeters, and that allowed them to pre-measure, which, like I said, was a big deal. Was a very big deal. Like I said, most people used sort of one 10-man squad as a bit of an elite force within their force as a reserve, and this is when sort of the sort of Stormtrooper meme started appearing, because most enemy players would look at them and go, oh, they're kind of interesting, but they're just like guardsmen, right? And they would get a nasty surprise when them bolters were not automatically punching through the armour back under the old AP system. And then the Stormtroopers would turn around and unleash some hot plasma death on the Marines, and that was when the Marine player learned that you don't need power armour to be a badass. Then we got the 13th Black Crusade, the campaign that Games Workshop did, one of the first major ones. And that was when the Stormtroopers were kind of remodeled. The normal Stormtroopers still existed, but they kind of got overshadowed by the release of the Kazakin, which is the model I've got up here for this video, is the Kazakin Sergeant. These are fondly remembered as probably the best Stormtrooper models. I agree. Whilst I love my classic metal Stormies, I have to say that Kazakin are probably the best sculpt that Games Workshop ever did for Stormtroopers. And if you're listening to this video, Games Workshop, as I suspect that you're definitely not, then please go back and make Kazakin. Kazakin are great. Everyone loves Kazakin. You know, just release them. Release them as a 5-man box, and I'll pay 25 quid for 5. I don't care. I've got more money than sense. I don't. It's a total lie. Anyway, point is they were very, very cool. And Stormtroopers, and the reason why Kazakin was so cool is because they were kind of modelled as this. They're the best of the best within the regiment. Most at this point, sort of Stormtrooper fluff was very much like your Stormtroopers came from your elite academy. And the difference between Stormtroopers and Kazakin were that Kazakin were liked by their comrades, whereas Stormtroopers weren't. Because Stormtroopers had lots of cool names like Glory Boys and Big Toy Soldiers, and the reason, that's what in universe the regular guardsmen called them, because they got the better equipment and they got the better training, and they were not part of the regiment. They were in addition to it. They were like attached to the regiment, but with Kazakin, they were the best of the best from within the Cajun regiment, so everyone had a lot of respect for them. They'd worked their way up through the ranks, and you had to prove to be the best to be there. So a lot of people liked them, and there was a bit more camaraderie. It was a bit nice. It was a bit nicer rather than the rivalry. It was a bit nicer. So a lot of people love the Kazakin models. I absolutely love them, and they've got that sort of proper military. It's sci-fi, but also kind of modern look to them. Yeah, they were very, very cool. And then Kazakin were how it stayed for a while. Kazakin were how it stayed for a very long time. All through, they were released in sort of 4th edition, essentially, late 3rd, beginning of 4th edition, and that's how it stayed through 5th edition. And then Games Workshop released Scions as a standalone faction, and they got their own little book, and it was all very cool. And that's when they got the new models that most people are familiar with today. The you know, the sort of gothic style armor mixed with the sci-fi weaponry and the the modern and the ancient style, which is it's like Marmite. Some people love it, some people hate it. I used to, I now quite like it, and when I've seen it done properly, I think it looks really, really good. So there we go. So that is the origin and the background of Stormtroopers and how they changed. So they went from being this little, you saw one squad in an army, to, with some exceptions, there were exceptions like the old grenadier regiments you could take, but we won't get into that now. And they changed from being an elite, for many people anyway, they changed from being an elite, oh, you have one in your army, to this kind of ability to take them as a total standalone faction. Now, unfortunately, Games Workshop kind of half-baked it. They had the ability to really release a proper sub-faction, but they didn't. Well, it's fair enough. Maybe they didn't think there was enough there. But so as a result, whilst you could run your Scions standalone, often you didn't. And that's kind of how they stayed for a long time, stuck between two places where they could be taken as a standalone faction, and you really wanted to. When you got into Scions, you really wanted to take them as a standalone faction, but they just didn't quite have enough to them. And this is really, it was with the advent of the release of the Codex and the, I guess, sort of Warhammer picking up and getting more and more popular over 5th, 6th, 7th and 8th edition, that really the quintessential Scion tactics were developed, and that is suicide squads. They would, you'd take a squad of, maybe take a couple of squads of five Scions, you'd give them a couple of plasma guns or a couple of melter guns, and the idea was to try and do drop pod space marines better than space marines. That was the whole thing. Drop 5 men in, melt or something, if they die, whatever, cheap throwaway squad. Because with Space Marines, you're paying for things like power armor, which you don't necessarily need on a Suicide Space Marine squad. You just want to be able to shoot as good as them. And that's basically what Scions could do. They were cheaper drop pod Space Marines with many disadvantages, but you paid for what you got. Get what you pay for. And so that is still, and those tactics still hold true today, but the Scions have undergone themselves and have taken advantage of some inherent rule changes. So previously, the reason why you didn't see a lot of, in competitive games, drop Scion forces was the way the deep strike rules worked. And we're moving away from background and fluff, guys, and we're moving now towards general tactics and themes within the army, things you want to be bearing in mind when you're building your Scion force, no matter what design, layout you go for. Keep these in mind. So we moved away from one of the big changes was the way the deep strike rules worked. So previously, deep striking was an incredibly unreliable thing, and there were some factions that could do it better than others. And Scions, being fairly basic humans, didn't get that many huge advantages. And the problem with deep striking, it was unreliable because it's scattered. So you would place your models on the board, you would get a scatter dice, which we don't have anymore. You get the Necromunda still, which has a couple. On the 6 dice, you've got 2 direct hits and then 4 arrows. If you get a direct hit, your guys land where they land and they're good to go. They don't move, perfect. Precision drop, perfection. However, that only happened 33% of the time. The rest of the time, they would scatter. And what would happen is you would look at the direction the arrow is pointing in and roll 2d6. And that is how, and they would move that many inches in that direction. So you might end up scattering away from the enemy, and you could scatter up to 12 inches away, putting you completely out of effective range. What if you're trying to rapid fire the plasma and you can't rapid fire it anymore? You could deep strike as close as you wanted to the enemy. There was none of this, you've got to stay 9 inches away bollocks. You could go an inch away if you wanted to and risk the dice. But the problem with doing that was, typically, if you landed on an enemy unit or you landed in terrain, your unit would either get lost, as in you would completely lose the whole unit, or they would suffer some other form of mishap that would essentially take them out of the game. And most of the time, you would just lose the unit. So people would deploy rather conservatively and hope that it went their way. But you can't really build a strategy around that kind of unreliableness, especially when you had other factions out there like Tau, who could farsight bomb with perfect precision, and Space Marines, who could use drop pods, where even if they landed on an enemy unit or on a terrain feature, they just ignored the penalty and they just moved slightly away and they were fine. So that's why you didn't see a lot of Scions in competitive lists, because whilst they had this ability to deep strike, it was kind of unreliable, and they weren't quite as cost effective of just taking normal guardsmen. Yeah, normal guardsmen. Everyone out there has a story about the time when their Scions, when they took 30 Scions, big 3 10-man squads, and they just plopped them in, and it went perfectly, and they cleared the board. Everyone has one of those stories. Everyone also has probably 100 similar stories where it went totally wrong and the Scions let them down. Unreliable. However, like I said, that's how it used to be, but Scions have got better now. So first off, deep strike rules have changed. Now you precision drop every single time. Yes, you have to stay over 9 inches away, but you can precision drop every single time. What does that give the army that it didn't have before? Reliability. Very, very key. When you're trying to build a competitive, or at least semi-competitive, semi-decent force, one thing you want is reliability, which is why you never see things like the Death Strike missile, because whilst on paper they might have the ability to do a huge amount of damage, they're not reliable enough for you to consider outside of a meme list. So Scions gained something which they'd never had before in great amount, which was reliability. Now, what's really, really important about Scions having reliable deep strike is it opened up a couple of tactical options for them. Previously, if they'd wanted reliability, they would have had to basically foot slog across the board, which was more suicide than a suicide drop unit, or mount up in Tauruxes and Chimeras, which added additional cost to the army because you were paying points to protect your guys. Now that they've got precision drop on all these units, they don't have to spend points on things that they wouldn't want to spend points. You don't have to buy Tauruxes for every unit now. You can just buy the ones that you have to start off on the board, and the rest can stay safely in deep strike. Great. Also, opened up, apart from the not having to take transports and gaining points efficiency and the reliability, it means that you're able to actually execute a plan and pull it off flawlessly. You see, one of the problems that Scions had previously is they'd always been touted as the Dark Elder of the Dark Elder. So if you were a Dark Elder player, it meant that you were the kind of person that, your army was very fragile, but it hit like a truck, and if it went just as planned, then you would win. Scions traditionally were like Dark Elder for Dark Elder players. Like, it really had to go to plan for it to pull off, and if it doesn't, your guys just melt. And that still stays true today, but now at least they can plan properly because they don't have to worry about their units just scattering off into no man's land. So, a couple of extra things that they have. Other effective changes they've got is they've now actually got access to the hotshot lasgun. And the way the AP system changed makes a big, big difference. And the way the wounding system changed. So previously you were taking Scions, and you didn't want your hotshot lasguns because they were only the equivalent of AP 5, which in these days is AP nothing. Or they were AP -3, which meant they were useless against Terminators because they had a 2+8. That's the old AP system. We won't get into that now. Under the new system, it means the Scions guns are always effective. You have a basic soldier for 7 points. Bear in mind, it's a huge points decrease. I should say, other big changes. Scions went from being 15 points per model to being 7 points model as of this video. So huge decrease over the years. So not only have you got a basic guy who is cheap, Skitarii hate them. They also come with an AP -2 gun as standard. And thanks to the AP system changing, it means that you can target any unit in the game, and really, if you wound it, you're taking a chunk out of it. And speaking of wounding, previously under the old way of wounding, if hotshot lasguns often would achieve nothing, and you were paying for them, and they achieved nothing. Now you can wound anything on a 6, even knights, which means your basic trooper, if you have enough of those hotshot lasguns and you level enough of them, you can really bring the pain that previously you couldn't do. So you can see there's lots of advantages going for them now. You know, we're not getting into specifics. We'll just talk, and we're not talking necessarily about the Scions, you know, themselves in great detail, but we're talking about the situation and how they've evolved over the years, and you know how now is the time of the Scion. How now they've got these general things going for them. So, where do Scions sit today? After we've had that introduction, we've had the history, and we've had how they've how the game has changed around them with the wounding system, the AP system, and the point changes and whatnot. Where do Scions sit today? And where are we going to? I'm going to finish this video today. I'm going to finish it soon, and we're going to end. You know, where do we find ourselves as a potential Scion player before we get into the rest of the videos? You know, how are we set up? Well, what we have access to now is a cheap infantry, mainline infantry unit, 7 points, with a good ballistic skill on a 3+ across the army. Means you're less affected by those modifiers that regular guard are affected by. You've got that, and you also now have access to multiple tactics. You're not shoehorned into one way of playing anymore, and you're a lot more reliable. So that's where Scions are now. Taking all those factors into account, Scions can genuinely be seen as a good force to take now. Now, am I saying that you take a pure Scion army, you're going to sweep the meta? Probably not. It's a good chance you probably won't do that. But am I saying if you take Scions, will you be totally useless? I'm not saying that either. Scions sit as a solid, mid-tier, decent, semi-competitive force if you take them standalone. They also are incredibly good at giving you tactical flexibility in your regular Imperial Guard army, because they no longer break the bank, and they can bring something that Guard really struggle with, which is opening up a second front. Not having to foot slog everything up the board. You can arrive where you want to arrive and put pressure on the enemy under your terms and not just react to the enemy. They give you that ability to be proactive, not reactive. And for Imperial Soup, they offer both the ability to add some cheap command points to your army. They are now the cheapest source of command points. But they also give you the ability to add something to your army which you might not already have. You know, there are many Imperial armies out there which actually lack good deep striking potential. Adeptus Mechanicus, Sisters of Battle. These armies are ones that don't typically have a lot of deep strike. They have some units which can do it, but that's not their main thing. Scions bring, and if they do have it, it can be very expensive. Seraphim are not cheap. Scions can bring you that ability. So they have very, very wide tactical uses now. And that's what we're going to be exploring in this series of videos. We're going to be looking at everything Scion. All the weapon systems, how to best utilize them, but what we're going to be looking at first going forward is we're going to be analysing the regiments for each Scion force. You've got many different regiments you can choose from now, and that's what we'll be looking at in future videos. So I hope you guys are excited for this, and I hope for those of you that are you're getting watching this series for the first time, I hope this is is a good introduction to get yourself in the mindset of this army. You're elite, you're hard hitting. If you have a plan and you pull it off, it will go very, very well, and you'll probably win. But the Scions are not. This is the thing I will end on, and something that I want you to keep in mind for this tactics series, which is Scions are not like normal Imperial Guard armies, or normal Imperial armies in general. You can't just sledgehammer your way to victory. Your infantry will not go toe to toe with regular guardsmen, because regular guardsmen are so much cheaper than you. Likewise, you won't go toe to toe with a Marine. Most of the time, the Marine will just beat the crap out of you in close combat. But you can, if you play cleverly, do very, very well. Very, very well. And I would say now, Scions are like playing traditional Dark Elder. I mentioned this before, but now they're like that. Whereas traditional Dark Elder now, it's all about, oh, my units are like basically Talos spam, or they can't be hit. So the Dark Elder are nowhere near as flimsy as they used to be. Scions are like that. If you're an old school Dark Elder player who's looking to get back into the hobby, seriously consider Scions. If that's the flavour you want to go for, an elite army with incredible punch, but cannot stand up to a stiff breeze, but can be very satisfying to pull off, and you get a real sense of special forces, you know, elite shock trooper kind of people. If that's the vibe you want, then this is the Tactics series for you. So, hope you guys are excited. I know I am. I'm really excited to take a look at this. First thing we're going to do is look at different regiments, and then we'll look at different weapon systems, and then we will look at how you can put it all together and apply it to the different armies, the different types of Scion armies that you can build. So, there you go, guys. Hope you enjoyed this video, and of course, I'll see you guys next time.